Ansel Vario.
And I am Helena Handbasket.
And I'm Ansel Birch, your host in post.
And it's
Time to party! Ow, ow, ow.
What's that word? Monorail.
Oh my god, we're going back to the monorail song?
Because we were at the Music Man.
No, I know. He's a music man. He's a what? He's a what? He's a music man.
What do you talk?
You know,
What do you talk, Ben? What movie are we talking about?
This month long on Time to Party, we are talking about Donnie Darko, which is like the deepest movie anyone ever sees when they're 14.
Yeah.
I keep saying that phrase because my colleague at Slash Film, BJ Colangelo, said it in her article. Donnie Darko, the ending explained. So
yeah, that's cool.
I was
Nice little
looking
name drop there.
right. Like I went through a number of articles just to refresh my memory on this movie because like having seen it when I was around 14 the first time.
Yeah, I think I was probably 14, 15 when I saw it. Because you and I are almost the same age.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And like I didn't fully get
we're
it.
all almost the same age, roughly. Yeah,
Yeah.
at this table, not to be
We're all
exclusive.
contemporaries.
My stars and
Quite.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this movie.
Yes,
This
so-
iconic movie that we watched as teenagers and our dear sweet Ansel watched for the first time for this podcast.
Yeah,
I was
And it was-
6 years old when I saw it for the first time. Yeah.
This was my suggestion.
it was.
And I feel great about it.
Yeah. In case you don't know about Donnie Darko, here is what our good friends at IMDb tell us. After narrowly escaping a bizarre accident, a troubled teenager is plagued by visions of a man in a large rabbit suit who manipulates him to commit a series of crimes. As we've established, this is not a great synopsis.
It's really not. It does not encapsulate the entirety of the film. But then again, what is this movie about?
I mean, those things do happen.
Those things
Correct.
do happen, but there are massive chunks that leaves out.
Yeah.
Yes, like time travel.
There's a shit ton of time travel in this,
Yes.
which is why we picked this for Time to Party.
Well, and also I think like I wonder if there's an argument to be made for like is what Frank has Donnie do ultimately almost like on a Batman scale heroic?
Oh, interesting.
Everything we learn about the shitty other people in their lives,
Right.
we learn because Donnie does something illegal.
Correct. Like burning down
Like
someone's house.
burning down his house and so they can find the kiddie porn dungeon.
God, yeah.
That's a thing I really said.
Yeah, no, but it is that,
What
like the
happens?
kiddie porn thing. That actually like is a really great segue into my first thing of like the time travel and the communication between Frank and Donnie versus mental illness and someone who has it's talked about throughout that he has schizophrenia and you know a young man in their teens being diagnosed with schizophrenia, which I if I'm doing my research correctly is a bit early for a schizophrenic personality type to develop, but the predictive nature of his condition versus his conversations with Frank, like what is the line between those two things? What is the line between the visions that he's having? Because oftentimes he's having those moments in the mirror where he's not looking at his own face, he's looking at Frank and he's having these conversations with Frank, like with the knife and what happened to your eye and all of that. It just is really interesting to see mental health portrayed in this time travel way, because oftentimes I think it gets into this, you know, especially seeing tropes of like women with mental health disorder, it gets into this like very yellow wallpaper gaslighty kind of vein. But it's really interesting to see a young man in his, you know, he's probably like meant to be 16, 17 years old in this, struggling with schizophrenia, which is a hefty diagnosis that thank God has
Easy.
It's not easy, and it's something that I think is becoming more treatable and becoming less stigmatized. But in that time, in the 80s, to have a kid with a mental health disorder like this, whose manifestation of it is this, like the therapist immediately saying, he says, I made a friend today, and she goes, real or imaginary? Like
In
that.
fact,
It gives me chills just to even like.
considering that Donnie's parents are in a tax bracket that they are, surprising that they didn't just send him away at the time. You know,
I wonder if that's supposed to tell us that this is a new thing.
I think so.
I wonder if Donnie is actually schizophrenic.
The pivot turn, as someone who has a personality disorder, and I will say this on the air, the pivot turn for a lot of diagnoses happened in the 90s. It went from multiple personality disorder to DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, as well as, you know, I think it was in the 80s or 90s that homosexuality came off of the diagnostic mental health disorder.
Into late 90s, I think.
Yeah, right. So like there could have been a huge pivot as to when schizophrenia or, you know, some sort of hallucinatory mental health disorder became part of the zeitgeist in the way that we know it now. Because also we're looking at coming out of the AIDS epidemic, which, you know, thank God we live in the era we do. And there's things like PrEP and, you know, all of that. But I think that there is a lot of stuff that we don't know about mental health disorder that causes 94. So this film being shot in the 80s, schizophrenia is fresh. That whole thing is so new. And it's especially, it's so, even now, we're in 2022, schizophrenia is so stigmatized as a condition.
It was in the DSM-3 in 1980.
DSM, sorry, yes. In 1983?
1980.
1980. So
the DSM-3 was 1980, the DSM-4 was 94.
Okay, so we're looking at DSM.
But it was still very fresh.
We're looking at DSM-3, which I believe was also what characterized homosexuality and probably hysteria. I don't know. Mental health is fucking brand new. It is brand fucking new.
Yeah, I mean, the story takes place in 1988, so who knows how much they really knew at the time.
And we hadn't had this evolution in, you know, what the new guideline is.
Actually, homosexuality was removed in 73
Hey!
in the DSM-2.
How about it? Still stigmatized, but...
Yeah.
Hey, let everyone donate blood, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that whole thing. Anyway, I just thought it was a really interesting thing to look at. What is time travel related and what is Donnie experiencing an episode?
Yeah.
And that's the question I have is, are we as an audience meant to confuse the two? Like, is his time travel a replacement? Like, is he not having a schizophrenic episode? Instead, he's having time travel.
Right.
Or is he having them as well?
Right.
That's my question.
That's exactly what I was getting to with what your question was. Is
You know, back in the day when I first saw this, I thought it was both at the same time.
yeah, same.
You know, but like revisiting this as a 30-something, it's like we know a lot more now about schizophrenia and all this stuff, and even time travel, kind of. So that's what Richard Kelly kind of brought to the table. He mixed them so, I don't want to say flawlessly, but like he mixed them up in a really interesting way.
In a way
where
that makes you think. It makes you question
think
it.
about both things.
Yeah, because there's no question that Donnie has some diagnosed mental disorders prior to the beginning of the film. Like he's already going to this psychologist. He's already on medication. The prior experience is present in the storyline. So it's not a question of whether or not he's been diagnosed or had episodes in the past, but is this a new manifestation of his existing brain chemistry, or
Are we seeing a larger phenomenon in the community?
And that's what I'm curious about, is like, and I don't think there's a right answer. I think it's meant to be ambiguous.
It's also really interesting to pick apart in terms of, you know, a mental health diagnosis it doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Sure.
It's something that does impact all of the relationships around that person. And are we seeing a very tight-knit community that is witnessing a young man who is experiencing mental health disorder on a profound level? And we're seeing the impact and the ramifications of acceptance of mental health disorder. Or are we looking at something that is affecting a larger community on a grander scale that truly encompasses and encapsulates everybody? And Donnie is a catalyst and a factor into that equation rather than the nucleus of that conversation, if that makes sense.
I think it has to be the former. And the reason I say that is because this community, it doesn't talk about anything.
Correct. Yes. And that is white middle America.
I mean, the town that they live in is called Middlesex, Virginia.
Correct.
So, like,
correct.
That's foreshadowing.
Right. It's Middlesex, Virginia. So we're also talking about this weird divide, which you know because you lived on the East Coast.
Right.
There is a distinct divide from the people who live in Virginia and the people who live in DC, because everybody in DC says I live on the East Coast. I live in the that northern area, whereas Virginia, there's this fine gradation, this ombre effect that happens of Virginia being classified as a southern state.
Right.
So there's a lot of conversation around that too.
Arguably, that ombre starts in Delaware.
Fucking greed.
Delaware, though, I think Delaware's got a different flavor of it.
Sure.
I mean, it's Maryland, too.
It's got the little brother flavor of it.
Yeah.
Of the like, I'm not going to be like my family.
Yeah. True.
But then you're kind of like...
We were separated by Maryland, but we would have been maybe...
Well, it's just really interesting to see, like, even Maryland, like, the pocket, like, Baltimore is, like, yeah, incredibly progressive.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a bubble.
Yeah.
Like 100%.
I mean,
correct.
We're in one right now.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Like, if Chicago wasn't what it was, good God, what would Illinois be? My stars.
In Pennsylvania, you have Philadelphia and you have Pittsburgh.
Correct.
And everything else in the middle is the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
Garbage.
That's why places like Ohio are such a problem, because Ohio has none of those things.
Wow.
Why, oh, why.
I just talked about my first note. So why don't you talk about your first note?
Oh my God. No, you don't want to see my first note because
is it going to make me cry?
Just read it verbatim. Let's see if we can decode this.
Jesus God.
Suck a fuck. How exactly does one suck a fuck?
I don't know.
You're bitching, but you're not a bitch.
You're bitching, but you're not a bitch.
So your first two notes
Your
are
son just called me a bitch. I just love the reaction of the parents because, like, not a big fan of the dad, huge fan of the mom.
Sure.
But that moment where she comes in and goes, your son just called me a bitch. And he goes, you're not a bitch. You're bitching, but you're not a bitch. The quips between these family members are profound, even to the point where Samantha Darko gets in on the action. When can I squeeze one out? Jesus God, that dinner table. Are you kidding?
What a great scene.
Wow, that whole, I think honestly.
How long do you think it took them to shoot that scene?
Oh, man.
It was either.
Maggie and Jake alone probably took up a large part of it.
Either one take or 12 takes.
The whole day.
I think you're right. I think that was either the first take or the 50th. Yeah.
Correct. And I don't, this is not shading or flexing in any capacity. I don't know if you understand the level of difficulty that goes into doing a take in and of itself, but a take where you have to reset for continuity purposes food.
Yeah.
That will take an entire day.
I don't know why we let food on film sets. Just should not be allowed.
Listen, I am such
opaque cups.
Great.
Empty forks. That's what you get.
Yep.
But my first real note, where have I seen this house before? In reference to the Darko house and the Jim Cunningham house.
Okay.
So the Darko house.
Oh my God, Ben, what an observation. Go on.
So the Darko house was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
It
was the Bueller house.
I swear to you, I have driven past that house.
Where is it? Do you know where it is?
Oh,
it's in California.
It's not here?
No, it's not.
I thought it was an Illinois house.
Yeah. I would like to talk about Charita Chen.
I also have a note that just says Charita.
Yes, because like,
what
is she in on the time travel
character?
Like, is she in on it? Well,
So
that was something that I really gravitated towards during this viewing because I never really acknowledged it before, but it seems like upon the most recent viewing that she's a much more important character than people realize.
So can I tell you a story about this particular film in the first couple times I saw it?
Okay.
So
Can I make a quick observation?
yes,
before you
please,
do?
absolutely do.
Because when you talked about Charita hearing things she wasn't supposed to hear, I wonder if Charita is our viewpoint character.
She is.
So go on.
Hands down. She's our viewpoint character that we see in a handful of scenes, which is fascinating.
She notices things.
Oh, she notices
only we are
things
supposed to know.
that only we as the audience see, right? So she sees things that we're not supposed to see. When I was a teen, I watched this movie with, I'm pretty sure I'm getting this story right, but I watched it with my friend Miriam, who was one of my ice skating friends. We would skate competitively together. And
You say I'm the interesting one.
I skated competitively for years. And we watched this movie together, and I distinctly remember she said, watch Charita. She sees everything that is happening, and she's not supposed to see what she is seeing. And it is shocking, and it is jarring, and it is one of those things where, like, she suffers the most abuse of any character easily. The level of xenophobia and racism that she experiences as a character is so profound. And
Go back to China, bitch.
Go back to China, bitch. Get off the stage, Charita. All of that stuff. Really, really, really fucked up shit. Also, I'm just remembering that Seth Rogen was in this film.
Yes, he was.
I just had that
was
moment
my
where
next note.
he was one of the bullies. Take a drink for every time you remember an all-star celebrity that is suddenly in your mind's eye. But I do think that she is a catalyst for the audience. I think, if I were to, I haven't watched the director's cut in years, but if I were to go through that, I'd be like, Charita is the lens through which we should all be examining.
The one who calls our attention to every key piece of
Right. The earmuff when she's listening in on the time travel stuff, the stuff where she like sees Karen breaking down. There's a lot of stuff she picks up on that like other characters don't. And it's that cringe moment where you're like, I wasn't supposed to know this, but like it is so beautifully integrated into the story. It's astounding.
Right.
I really love that factor about her. I love Charita.
Yes. When in my version of the DVD, it includes The Philosophy of Time Travel by Roberta Sparrow.
Oh my
You
God.
can look at it
Grandma
as,
Death.
Yes, as like a special feature. And I started looking at it, and I'm just like, is Charita one of these people that
one of
Roberta talks about in the book?
Like the Watchers, right? Like,
Right,
is that the word that she uses? The Watchers.
There's the living receiver, which is Donnie, I believe.
Oh yeah.
Is this in the movie?
Yes, he talks about this a little bit,
With his teacher, who's like, I'm gonna have to stop talking about this
Yes.
stuff. Which also put a pin in that because I don't know why the teacher cut him off from that.
It's a Catholic school.
He
He
can
can
talk about that shit.
Why would you not be allowed to talk about time travel?
Well, the way that Roberta Sparrow talks about time travel seems to be very
Anti-God? Maybe not anti-God, but questioning God.
right. Yeah, and I think that by questioning God, he could lose his job.
Mm-hmm. Or at least embracing of the supernatural that is not of God.
Yes. So we have the living receiver, the manipulated living, the manipulated dead, and then there are other instances in here. And I feel like Charita doesn't get talked about enough, but I feel like she's like the primary manipulated living.
Yes, I agree with that.
Because
She sees things that not only is she not supposed to see, but like I don't think under circumstances where she was consensual that she would opt to see.
And the difference between Charita and, say, Jim Cunningham is that Cunningham didn't know that he was being manipulated. But Charita seemed like she knew what was going on.
She knew what was going on, and I don't think she knew how to stop it.
And she kept trying.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
And then her classmates just kept being racist and shit and telling her to go away.
Well, also, even as insofar as the talent show where she does this solo act of like Winter Angel, right? Which this talent show is happening in the dead of spring, summer. Like it's warm out, and she's doing Winter Angel, And very shortly afterwards, picks up on another signal from the universe, and she's still in that white angel thing. I do think she's the manipulative or manipulated living. Yeah, like you were saying.
Yeah, you know, Donnie Darko is such a wormhole that you could fall down.
Literally.
Because
they come out of your chest.
Yes, exactly.
Slinky.
Because when you're 14 and watching this movie the first time, you're not doing anything but speculating.
Correct.
You know?
Correct.
And I mean...
Even as an adult. Ansel, I want to turn it over to you. Like, we watched this when we were 14, 15, 16 years old. What did it feel like watching it as someone in their 30s? What did you feel in that?
I think the thing about watching it as an adult is that I immediately saw that Donnie wasn't the person to watch. And I feel like if you watched it as a kid or as a younger person, Donnie feels like your window in.
Right.
Until you see like Charita or somebody else who's like got that better window. I spent the whole time trying to figure out which adult was going to help him. And it wasn't until we saw Grandma Death and I'm like, she's the one with the answers and we're never going to get him out of her.
And we got one line out of her in the whole film.
And that line gave us exactly what we needed to know. We just didn't understand it till later.
Right.
It's
Correct.
So good.
Talking about this movie gives me chills.
Yeah.
Every time.
It's so well put together.
It is.
And also, I think that, I don't know, the thing that really struck me, and I don't know if this is what struck you guys, and we're jumping ahead to say this,
No,
but
go off.
the importance of his choice at the end is what really, like, the whole movie was sort of like happening to me, and I was like, you know, enjoying it and watching it.
Sure, like a spectator.
It was fun. It wasn't until we see the moment where he gets to choose that it was like, this is why this movie is important.
Correct.
So that brings up a really interesting part about this discussion, because here on Time to Party, we do tend to venture into the time travel mechanics
Right, that's the whole point.
of the movie. And Donnie's choice is just as much ingrained in the time travel mechanic as anything else that happens in this movie, right?
This is straight up some Closing Doors shit. Did you ever see Closing Doors?
I don't know.
You haven't seen Closing Doors? Can I be a guest again? You haven't seen Closing Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow?
Yes, you can.
Are you serious? You guys haven't seen this?
I've not seen this.
So this is very much the like choose your own adventure trope
Okay.
of, is it Closing Doors? It's Closing Doors. I'm pretty sure. It's like it was in the mid 80s, I want to say. And it was an earlier Gwyneth Paltrow film, but it was all of the choices that this person makes affect their life. And it is that choose your own adventure of like, at this moment, did you take the right time? Sliding Doors. Thank you.
1998.
Jesus Christ. It was, okay. It was earlier. It was later than I thought. But Sliding Doors, where like you miss your train, you don't miss your train. How does that impact your life with who you meet? So I think that it's very much in that realm.
They kind of go into that in About Time, which is one of my favorite time travel movies that we haven't gotten to talk about yet. Domhnall Gleeson and Bill Nighy are in a family whose male members can travel through time.
Whoa.
And they tend to use it to make their families' lives better. And when Domhnall Gleeson discovers this power, he goes back and tries to do everything right with the girl of his dreams, who is Rachel McAdams.
Also, Bedazzled is on my list.
Bedazzled is great. But
Also time travel related.
Bedazzled does not hold up the way you think it does.
It does. It absolutely fucking does not.
No, it doesn't.
We watched it the other day and we were like, oh no.
Yeah.
But yes, that your choices do impact.
Exactly. They do. And the whole thing about time travel in Donnie Darko is that they're stuck in a time loop where the end of the movie is at the beginning in a different way.
Correct.
It's almost Tarantino-esque, but not as bro-y. This is the emo Tarantino.
Well, it's just
Richard Kelly. That's what he should become.
Wow.
well, it's just this whole dark thing where you like realize this dark thing about the flight that the sister and the mom are on, and realizing as soon as you see the whoosh moment, you're like, oh fuck, that's the engine.
Yep.
And like, what happens if Donnie chooses to be saved from that versus what happens when he chooses to die from that?
It's like the much darker side to George Bailey. You know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In that movie,
Or even Ebenezer Scrooge. Yeah, very much
exactly.
that. Yeah.
You know, and these are things that have been happening in literature forever.
Yeah.
So to get this update in 2001, you know, with emo Jake Gyllenhaal,
Ugh, God bless.
it's such it's like Shrek says.
It's got layers.
It's got layers.
It's got layers.
Parfaits have got layers.
Right. So Donnie is taking a similar approach to George Bailey in that they're thinking about what life would be like without them.
Yeah, correct.
And, you know, George gets the option of doing it again, whereas
Right.
without Donnie, his mother and sister don't die. His girlfriend doesn't die. But Jim Cunningham isn't outed as a sexual predator.
Right. Yeah. Like, what do these paths look like?
Exactly.
We're not
So-
seeing the full scope.
So for Donnie to choose death, it seems like he's choosing the path that does more good than bad.
Correct. Yeah. He's
know?
weighing his options because ultimately, as humans, like, we're not, no one is a good or an evil. We're all sitting in neutral and we have good aspects and evil aspects of ourselves.
Right.
And that's exactly what that is. We start off at the top of the time loop, right? And then we circle back and we realize that we are part of this time loop. We are seeing both trajectories of like, we see the trajectory of what happens when he chooses to not die or or is in a situation where he doesn't die due to the circumstances. But also, would his mom and sister have died regardless?
Well,
Because the jet engine falls regardless. We see it fall once at the top where he doesn't die and everybody's like, it fell in your room. And Samantha's blaming Donnie for that. Or we see at the bottom where everybody's mourning the loss of Donnie. The jet engine falls either way. Does that kill both the mom and the sister? We don't know.
well,
I think it must not because we see them mourning Donnie.
also there's a
But, like-
sequel called S. Darko that no one should watch.
Oh, no.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, no.
I don't want to see it.
S. Darko as in Samantha Darko.
As in Samantha Darko.
Got it.
As in she starts exhibiting similar symptoms as Donnie.
Which I don't
believe.
think is shoehorning anything in because Sam is the only one to walk in on Donnie
True.
in the midst of his having an episode and about to take his pills. And he goes, I'm just taking my pills, Sam. That whole moment.
That's a good point.
She is seeing the decline of her brother's mental health.
Right.
And if it runs in the family, it runs in the family. And that's like pretty undeniable in that situation in that time. This whole film is incredibly intentional. There's not anything that has been thrown out frivolously. It is all an option for us as the audience to consider. We are meant to consider all aspects of what Charita is going through. We are meant to consider all aspects of what happens in the weeds of, does Donnie die? Does Donnie live? What happens what are the ramifications thereof? We are meant to see the minutia of, Maggie Gyllenhaal coming in late from a date and wearing what she's wearing.
Yeah.
Everything in this film is intentional. Hands down. I really want to talk about the horror movie moments throughout this film because... Right. Frank is a horror monster, for sure. And I'm a big horror fan. I'm someone who evolved into a horror fan. I was a little bit of a creepy kid. I didn't really glom on to horror until I was probably like 25, 26. You, as my friend who I know pretty well, don't like horror as a genre. It's not something that you tend to gravitate towards. You'll indulge a dark fantasy, but if it's horror comedy, yes. John and I are incredibly avid horror fans. We have a Shudder subscription. Nice. I have been in a horror film. I could have another horror film coming up. We'll see. Horror is like the genre that I really want to break into because I love it. But I was finding myself while I was rewatching this film, and as a teen who didn't like horror, who liked kind of gothy, like weird avant-garde arty shit, but wasn't fully immersed in the like I can watch the Scream franchise and not lose my mind, which was incredibly scary to me. The idea of a home invasion, finding out it's someone you know.
It's terrifying on purpose, yeah.
Oh God, so scary. But watching this over again, the thing that just like, it was like a glaring red light for me was that this is actually a horror film in a lot of ways. Yeah. There's so many horror elements. There's so many jump scares, like especially we were talking earlier on the last episode about like the drinking and smoking episode of Donnie standing in the mirror looking at Frank or looking at his own reflection, and he has a knife and he's like hitting the glass, but you can't tell if he's hitting his own eye, and then you find out that Frank has this like horribly bloody eye later. The idea that the climax of the film happens on Halloween, bitch, tell me that's not horror.
Yep.
And then it happens in a cellar at Roberta Sparrow's house. Basement cellars, notorious for horror stuff. Someone gets shot, someone dies. There's that whole moment in the cellar where she plays the chord of like ding ding ding, and it's all out of key. Like it is 1000% horror at that point.
And it's all about prophecy and destiny.
Correct.
Right.
So we went from this like weird, like kind of campy fun, you know, a retake on an 80s film, into like, oh shit, like this dark moment, like in the movie theater when they go to see Evil Dead. They go to see Evil Dead. They're the only people in the theater. The portal opens, and all of a sudden, Frank is there with a bloody fucking eyeball, talking about, let me show you the way, points to Jim Cunningham's house, and is like, this man is the actual horror. This man is into child pornography. Burn it down. Like, that level is like, we're seeing the difference between camp horror of a man in a bunny suit with a bloody eye, very scary, spooky, but also we're seeing true monsters in real life of like men who take advantage of children. Like, absolutely.
Like when we saw this as kids, we almost had the hot topicification, if I can coin
that is
term.
a great way to
Topicification, yeah.
Like
hot topification,
because we remember Sparkle Motion, we remember Frank the Bunny, but we tend to not remember the horrific aspects of it until we watch it much later.
Correct. It's why we have Hellraiser t-shirts. It's why people are obsessed with, you know, Freddy and Jason and the iconography around those monsters.
Yeah. But then we're reminded that they are actually monsters. You know?
They are.
Chucky. Fuck that guy.
Yeah, I knew you wouldn't like that.
I don't like that.
Did you watch the new one where
No, absolutely not.
Well, but where Mark Hamill's the one who's voicing. It's Mark Hamill. I know you do. That's why I'm asking.
This is a terrible thing to talk about publicly, but I am very afraid of Chucky.
No, don't. It's okay. That's okay.
As a kid, I had a lot of toys.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And like the movie Small Soldiers was like the very middle point of that. Of toys coming to life and kicking your ass.
Chucky.
Yeah, and it was also in the vein of like Toy Story, which was very fun.
Because I love Toy Story.
Right.
I tolerate Small Soldiers. I hate Chucky.
Yeah, no, that's the full spectrum of that.
I love Jennifer Tilly.
Jennifer Tilly is a fucking saint.
What a babe.
What a babe.
Still,
hands down.
To this day.
Hands down.
Jennifer Tilly, any age can get it. Just saying.
I love that.
Yes.
I just think it's really interesting that we stumbled upon, or, you know, I deeply, vehemently stamp my feet about wanting to do Donnie Darko as a time travel movie that, yes, has massive amounts of time travel aspects because, like, we're literally watching Evil Dead and a portal to time opens up, but also has horror aspects into it because, like, horror is something I'm so passionate about. And ultimately, as an actor, I would hope that I make more horror movies than anything else, you know, like love a rom-com. I've done 2 rom-coms.
They're delightful.
I love a rom-com, but I'm hoping to do more horror because I love horror. It's really fun.
Well, Porque No List does.
Why not both? I can do both.
You can do both.
I've got range.
Get your friend who can do both.
Correct.
They can do both. Can confirm.
So I just really wanted to like touch upon the fact that there are horror movie moments throughout this, like even like icon level, like monster, like we see Frank. there's that moment where like
Frank is absolutely an icon level monster.
and scary, right? Like very scary. There's that moment where we go from Jake Gyllenhaal with a knife and it cuts back and we see Frank, who is not a fucking Playboy bunny, is not a mascot bunny. He's a scary fucking bunny with a skull face.
Yeah.
Like, and it happens so fast.
And there is no way that Frank the bunny and Frank the dude in a bunny suit are the same person.
Correct.
Like, Frank the bunny is a whole other monster.
It's an extrapolation of this kid's mindset. But we don't meet Frank until Gretchen dies.
I just had a realization. You know what that means?
What?
He's been through this time loop before.
Correct.
You know,
He knows this time loop.
when we talk
And
about,
he's trying different variants on it.
Fuck, that just hit me.
Wow. Let's all pause and take a drink on that one.
Take a drink when it hits you.
when we talked about Palm Springs, we talked about the grandma.
God, love that
going
movie.
Through the time loop multiple
Yeah.
times. And in Donnie Darko, Frank the bunny is the grandma.
I have two more thoughts, actually. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
So I just want to touch upon the fact that, I mean, we talked about the Gyllenhaal family affair, which Maggie and Jake should do more films together. They, as far as I know, canonically or
actually done a handful.
resumeically, they've only done a handful, but I just want to see them in more things because their back and forth is so fun.
I want to see them acknowledged as siblings.
Well, they did in Donnie Darko.
Like in this movie, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, more of that as
Like more of
as
that.
adults. Yeah.
In Brokeback, I don't think they were siblings.
No.
They were very distant, but it was very much like
Sky.
yeah.
I don't believe they were.
Which is too bad, because that movie...
I love that movie.
I also just, this isn't, we don't have to extrapolate on this, but I really need to talk about the fact that Donnie has this baby voice every time he goes into his episodes with his psychiatrist.
Hate it.
Hungry, hungry hippos. I'm like, holy shit. Like, especially it gets really creepy when he does his weird jerk off thing where he's putting his hand down his pants. And I'm like, and the therapist is like, but, and also chime in if you have anything to say about that. I just thought it was really fucking weird. But like, I get it. There's like an infantilizing thing that comes up when he goes into these states of like, I think it's a safety mechanism.
Yeah.
The
for
first
sure.
time he does it, I thought he was fucking with the psychiatrist.
I thought so too. And then it keeps happening. And I'm like, no. This is what happens when he goes into these states.
Right.
This is a coping mechanism. This is a safe space. This is his, like, you know, his fort as a kid who is going through extreme mental health disorder. Go on.
There was one other note that I forgot to bring up. And it's a very short note. When Donnie says, I don't want to die alone, I wrote, yeah, I get that, bro. Like,
And he talks about the dog going under the porch to die. Callie the dog. So here's the reason why I love Donnie's mom. And I don't think that my mom is ever going to listen to this. So this is why I'm going to say this out loud. Donnie's mom reminds me a lot of my mom.
Interesting.
I love my mom profoundly. It has taken a very long time to get to the place in my life where like I get this woman and I understand her, and I'm also like I am in the age of where she was when she had me and my brother. Right? Like there's a certain level of understanding when you hit that age. So hearing her talk, watching that the fact that her way of handling grief at the end of the movie, she's not like, you see the dad weeping, you see Samantha weeping, you see Maggie Gyllenhaal just like beside herself solo, having this epically grievous, tearful moment. And you see the mom leaning up against a tree, having a cigarette.
Yeah.
And she has enough capacity to look at Gretchen, who she has no idea at this point who this person is. And she can just wave and smile at this girl. Reminds me a lot of my mom, and reminds me a lot of how my mom handles trauma and how I was kind of taught to handle trauma. Of like, ultimately, I think that this woman didn't want to have kids and has kids and is treating her kids like adults because that's what you do with that.
sure.
You know, so I think that maybe there's a product of like this infantilizing moment that Donnie has where like he had to grow up really fast.
Right.
So maybe beyond like a child abuse moment, which I think might be a little bit of a reach given contextually. Like, we're given a lot of clues. So I don't think that maybe necessarily there's an abuse moment, but I do think that there's a level of, Donnie, you're the middle child, and there is another kid who is like in early middle school, and you got to keep your shit together. And I understand that.
There's also theory that at the end, the residual whatever from the previous timeline remained with Gretchen and Mrs. Darko.
Which is where that, like, I know you.
Exactly. The weird I know you wave comes from.
Well, I wonder if they all have some level of...
Yeah. I think the father, Samantha, and Maggie, I can't remember Maggie's name, but I'm going to say Maggie because it's Maggie Gyllenhaal.
Yeah.
They don't have that response. But we see Gretchen. We see the mom, particularly. Yeah. I think the mom is an incredible character. She's an overlooked character. She's an unsung hero of this whole thing. We see these people who are profoundly affected by this tragedy who know what that tragedy felt like.
She was right to doubt Sparkle Motion.
I mean, listen, I'm doubting your commitment to Sparkle Motion. I do have one last thought.
Go for it.
This is a quote because it's towards the end, and it's Dr. Thurman, the psychiatrist, who has this beautiful monologue. Like, what a babe. What a babe. Is that Thurman?
That's a Thurman.
Okay. No, Thurman, not Theremin. But I saw what you were doing, and I love that I knew what you were doing. But she has this line where she says, if this world were to end, there would be nothing but you and him and nothing else. And ultimately, this movie boils down to Donnie's perception of this thing that is actually him. So ultimately, we're going back to what you were saying about Kelly wanting to go under the porch and die alone because Roberto says every living creature dies alone.
Yes.
And even if we're surrounded by friends, family, loved ones, that's ultimately where we land. So, like, I think, if I'm picking apart this thing and not referring to any of the directorial choices in this, I think ultimately, like, that's the meat of this is, like, we really have to accept the fact that, like, at the end of it all, in those last several seconds, that's where we'll be. But there are choices up until that point. There's so many choices up until that point. It's tendrils and tendrils of choices up until that point.
Right. It's...
And his tendrils of fate were revelatory.
Yes.
Not fatalistic.
Yes, they were revelatory for everybody.
Yeah.
Especially Charita. Charita saw so many of those tendrils of fate.
Where's all the Charita merch?
Charita's a fucking bad bitch, and she does not get what she deserves.
Charita should get just as much recognition.
Charita should have worn a cool mask. That's all I'm saying.
Amen, fam. All that being said, I know we kind of got into like more in depth. Like, I know with like this is a fun time travel podcast, but I think Donnie Darko is like a pretty profound film, and I think it really did define a particular gap of people who are our age, who went into that mindset.
Right. I mean, Ansel, correct me if I'm wrong, but back in the day, a salon, a party like that, involved this kind of deep thinking.
Correct.
I think so. Yeah.
I love a
Ansel
salon.
would know because out of all of us, he looks like a time traveler.
That's true.
He's a time lord. Are you kidding? This fucking mustache.
It's the mustache.
It's profound.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay, great.
So, friends, party people,
family.
Yes. What's up, fam?
What up, fam?
Is Donnie Darko worth your time?
Hands fucking down, because I've watched it so many goddamn times and I still find things to pick apart about it.
Absolutely. It's one of those movies that as you grow and you revisit it, you find something new. Like we were saying earlier, like when I watched it the first time, I was like, oh, Jenna Malone's cute.
Sure. I was like, oh, Donnie Darko and Maggie Gyllenhaal? What am I experiencing emotionally?
And then,
I want to be a part of Sparkle Motion. I seriously doubt your commitment to Sparkle Motion. You have to use at least one of those in it.
Oh,
Okay, great.
We'll do a super cut.
Super cut of me being dumb. Anyway.
But then as you get older, you know, you start to see where the adults are coming from, you know? And I mean, kind of where Frank is coming from to a certain point.
Right.
But, like, no matter where you're coming from, Patrick Swayze is a dick in this movie.
Oh,
I know.
Such a, yeah.
But Ansel,
Yes.
considering you hadn't seen this movie before we made you watch it,
Right.
is Donnie Darko worth your time as an older person watching it for the first time?
Very.
Older person, as someone in their mid-30s watching this movie.
As someone who
I just have to specify, yes, as someone who,
Older as
for
in
the
you were.
first...
I wasn't 14 when
Exactly.
I saw it. Yeah.
You weren't-
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh.
Absolutely, this movie is worth it.
Do you think you would watch it again?
I intend to watch it again.
I really love this. Thank you for indulging
I
me.
think it's a really, as an adult, I think it's a really interesting viewpoint on fatalism and the choices you make when you're young and the reasons that you make them in a way that maybe a young person sees from a different lens.
Right.
Because I'm looking back on Donnie Darko's age now.
You know what's really interesting now that you say that, this jogged my memory. I read a shit ton of Camus because not only was I a weirdo French kid, but then I ended up being a French major.
Right.
So I'm very much getting Stranger vibes. I'm very much getting like, I mean, I fucking hated Kafka, but which is really funny because I really enjoyed The Stranger.
Another hot take from...
I know. You should have a whole fucking season of me
Donnie
being an
Darko is your
asshole.
gateway into Kafka.
No, but I think it was my It was my gateway into knowing that I didn't fucking care for Kafka, but I did care for Camus because he did care. There was a lot of heart that went into it. There was
Camus
a lot.
doesn't disassociate from the subject.
Right, exactly. And I think that's the difference for me personally. But hearing what you just said is exactly what jogged my memory about why I love Camus. Anyway,
It's been college conversations.
so I have a French degree. Yeah, I went to theater school and got a French degree. I got a very expensive piece of paper that I can't pay for.
All right. Cool. So, if people want more of your hot takes, Helena, where can they
There's
find
so many fucking hot takes, especially on Twitter, because I think I've been pretty fucking ruthless on Twitter lately.
I mean, you've been more active on Twitter lately than you have been since I
And they're
know
pretty funny.
You're pretty funny.
I am pretty
You're
funny.
pretty funny.
I am at only handbasket on Twitter, and I am at the Helena Handbasket on Instagram.
I am at BSilveria20 on Instagram and Twitter.
I am at Indecisionist on Twitter and The Indecisionist on Instagram.
If you want to join in on the conversation, drop more hot takes, talk about Kafka, talk about this bullshit and more in hashtag time2party. That's time, the number 2 party. Woo-wee!
And as always,
Excellent to each other.
and party on, dude!